Right, everybody. Welcome to this session of our online training. Today we're going to be covering transaction importing, and I'm happy to have you here today. And I am a Microsoft certified consultant with SL. Probably have worked with several of you in the past, so I'm happy to be working with all of you again. And my name is Louis Brennis. Great. So everybody can see the screen. Microsoft Dynamics SL, this is 2011. This particular image that you're seeing here is Feature Pack 1, which is the latest and greatest. So what we're going to do is, I'm already logged into SL actually. That's the home page that this one opens up to. So when we talk about transaction importing, we're specifically talking about what's under the administration menu inside of System Manager in this version. It has changed its location in terms of where it was, sometimes in the older versions under Utility, but in this case now it's under System Manager and Administration. So first off the bat, that would mean that you have to have permissions to run transaction import. So if you don't have that permission, then that'll be something that'll be added to your group or user rights. And then in terms of where it is, you can see here under Utilities, you got these two guys here that I'm moving around with my mouse. Transaction Import, and you got Control Macro Generator, which sounds kind of funny and complicated, but it's actually rather straightforward in terms of the macro generator. You all may be familiar with macros. You may have written some macros. They're used in Excel and other Office applications. They use Visual Basic basically for the logic. So this macro is basically a macro of logic for the screens that we'll be importing into. So right off the bat, the first thing you want to do is, what screen do you want to import into? And why would you want to import into the screen in the first place? Let's talk about that for a minute. So if you have a large number of transactions, a very huge batch, perhaps an external system you're getting information from, the way Solomon works is that it provides this interface through the screen and specifically through transaction import. You can have other complex methods of integration, but this is the most straightforward one and the one that is friendliest to the user as yourselves. So if you have a small amount of information to get into Solomon, you don't really need the import. It's really for repetitive or automating some manual processes with large amounts of information. So for example, when we talk about Control Macro Generator, I'm going to talk about what these screens do, and then we can get into the actual importing of data. So here's what that fancy screen looks like, again assuming that you have permissions for this screen. So what it says here is, okay, I'm in this company and I want to generate the logic for the screen that I want to import into. So you have the field for screen, a type of control type of file that it's going to create for the logic, and then also the control file name, which is basically your output file that it's going to put this logic into. So for example, if you hit F3 here, it pretty much covers the gamut of all the screens inside of SL. So pretty much you're basically able to import into most screens. So let's just, let's say for example I was going to pick budget maintenance. And then we see next is that it tells you if you want to import with the intelligent logic or simple logic. So what does that mean? Intelligent basically means what's implied, which is it can handle a little bit more robustness in terms of the importing and some of the intelligence between required and non-required fields. And simple basically means what it says, that it's just a straightforward, simple import. So it just has the fields and the values, and then if there's anything wrong, it's not quite as flexible. Alright, so let me go ahead, and for the purposes of this, I've actually created the intelligent and simple outputs. But what it says is, if I say browse, here's where I want to put the file under my username. The funny thing with importing is that the paths really do need to be rather short. If you have a really long path for the files, it can sometimes cause issues, and it's not clear if it's the path length or the file name being too long. So you want to keep it simple. And so let's say I want to create this screen. You notice that it says 0125,000, 0125,000, and when we go here we see 0125,000. So it's giving you every screen in SL has a screen number. So we say OK. So what it did is, it actually, if you saw it there, it was kind of fast. I actually popped the screen open, and then it reduced it again and created this output file. If you wanted to see what the output actually was, you can say view macro. And what you see here is let me minimize this again. We chose the intelligent format. Let me close this for a second. So we chose the intelligent format, so when we view the macro, it looks rather like a series of logical syntax in terms of the code. So if we just scroll down, basically this says this is how the logic is being handled for the import for that particular screen. Now, in terms of for yourself, do you need to know this logic? Do you need to understand it? Do you need to know exactly what it does, what it covers? Some of it is covered, actually it is covered in the Solomon guides. They do go into like the nitty-gritty details of each of these things. But the main thing to know is that you have levels. You have levels for how you import the data. And so here's what you see here. So it's saying case 0 of 0 for importing data. So let me back up for a second. What do levels mean? So in a screen you can have multiple levels of data. Let's go to the budget screen for a second. And again, if you have any questions along the way, just feel free to drop them in the chat window. So we go to, let's go to budget maintenance under general ledger. Here's budget maintenance. So when we look at this screen, everything is basically on this screen at the same level. So this would be called like the first level in the case. So when you see here case 0 of 0, it says that you can import it with a tag, which we'll show in a second, of level 0, or you can use the alias of budget. So it begs the question, what screen would have more than one level? And it's actually rather intuitive. It's any screen that has multiple, you could say, parts to it. So for example, if we choose journal transactions, you see this kind of grid looking like box here, and then you have this other grid looking like box here. So this is the transaction level, and this is the batch level. So a journal transactions basically has two levels. If you then go to accounts payable, And you see again another kind of grid looking box thing here, batch, and it identifies, it says all the data elements inside of this box pertain to basically an identifier, if you will, called batch. Same thing with document, everything inside this box pertains to document. And then down here, detail, everything inside the transactions details belongs to the detail field, basically, or identifier. So this one would have 0, 1, 2, 3 levels: batch, document, and detail. So for our purposes, we were talking about budget maintenance, and you can see there is no grid separating this screen from any other piece of data. So if you wanted to know, well, what would a budget entry look like for the importing, it's basically going to be whatever you would enter on this screen, given the logic and restrictions applied here. So for example, if we compare these guys, we see here, yes, this is for the budget, and it's talking about the account, and what it shows here is account is a required field. If there were a mask, some type of requirement that it has to be a certain format, it would show it here, which we'll talk about at this level, at this field here. But what you see here is anything that says required. So technically speaking, anything that says the word required is really what you're going to, at least at the very minimum, have to provide for the import to work. If it's not required, you can skip it, basically. Leave a placeholder in the import. So what we see here is, does it actually match? Let's see. I'm going to move this to the right over here. So account, C account. C, don't worry about the prefix. What it does is, for screen logic purposes, there is a label applied to this, and here it's called C account. So that the account is actually what it is. And so we say, okay, it's required. Yep, looks red. It's required. We go to C sub. And so it says required field, and yep, it's required. Ledger ID, required field, so that's required. Fiscal year, required field, and that's required. And then as you look at the rest of these, it doesn't really appear that there's anything else that says required. And then if there's any fields that come with the screen, either by default or fields that you've added, the logic of the screen will say whether it's disabled or not disabled. So I'm using this demo database that Microsoft provides, and then on their screen they're saying that a field called period 12 has been disabled, and so forth and so on. So that's what all those things mean. And it talks about the cancel button and all that. You don't really have to worry about that. So again, to summarize, you want to look for the required and fields, and non-requireds you don't have to worry about. And you want to look for the mask that it's accepting it in. So sub-account is going to look for this type of mask. The rest of the logic, the overall logic, has been provided for you by the control macro generator. So if I wanted to get a sense of, let me see what these guys actually look like with the mask, I can say, let's say pick an account. I was just arbitrarily choosing this, enter company sales. And if I were to pick the sub-account, let's say I pick 2 for manufacturing. And then the rest, 0, 0, I'll just pick zeros all over. And your screen and your setup, on your system, may have these be strings or may have these be, you have to pick each element of your sub-account one by one. And then let's say your ledger ID is budget 1. So this particular installation for this demo has 2 budget ledgers. So the revised date is not required, so it'll populate it in with defaulting to the current date of today. But if you wanted to provide that, you could. But so that's what the actual screen would look like. So we say, okay, so now that we got a sense of that, let's go to, I haven't saved it yet, so We go back to this and we say we've calculated or produced this macro generator file. So we go back to, not that, we go back to the transaction import screen. So for show and tell purposes, simple file. What's the difference? What does it look like? Well, let's generate that guy. We say OK. So we've generated the macro, or the actual control file, CTL, which actually does open up in Notepad, which is what we were kind of looking at with all that fancy logic. So we say, well, what does that look like different than this intelligent one? So let's click View Macro. So voila. What this does is it lays it out in this horizontal format, the actual fields on the screen per level. So like we talked about, there's only one level for the budget screen, right? So these are all the fields, and then you look here and you say budget. Budget is a tag or identifier, and you see account, sub-account, ledger ID, fiscal year, and then if you really kind of look into the fields, the names usually do guide you. So budget, revision date, last revised. If you really wanted to get specific and double check, you could, if you have permissions, go into customize mode. And I actually have more than one screen open. But you can go into customize mode and take a look at the field itself. Let me close transaction import. Actually, I still have it open. We'll come back to that as a trick that we can use to identify these fields on the screen. But the thing to note here is, for layout purposes, when you're creating your data import file, you're going to need to know what order to put the fields and where they fall in the layout. So this is a really nice way to kind of simplify that process for you. You can literally just take this and create your Excel file, which is probably the method that you're going to use first to create the import. So we go all the way down to the end, and we see all the fields are listed there. It doesn't tell you what's required, so by looking at this, the difference between the intelligent and the simple file is that this one does not identify the required ones. Unless you're really familiar with the screen, you would not know until you ran the intelligent version to know that the first few are required and the rest are not. Okay, so we got two versions of this file now. And let's go, let me close this. Close this, I don't need to save it. No. And I've gone into here. Actually here. So I have intelligent and simple, and to keep them straight in the files for them not to get overwritten, I just put a -I and a -S earlier today to make sure that those were correct. So let's open up the file in Excel, which I went ahead and created. Actually, I skipped a step. Let's say that you have now the simple one, and you want to use it to lay out your import file, your Excel file. Well, if you say open this with Excel, you could do it that way, or the simplest way is to, again, first verify it in Notepad. One thing you see right away is that it is comma delimited. So if you're a heavy user of Excel, you know that you can delimit files in multiple ways, either with columns, spaces, tabs, quotes, all kinds of ways. So this one provides you a means of delimiting the fields with commas. So what we do is we actually start Excel, and we close this. So now we're in Excel. We have a brand new worksheet. or workbook I should say, and we want to import this file into Excel, and we want it to be sensitive to the commas that are being delimited here for these fields. So I say data, and I say over here, let me maximize this. So I'm in this blank field. I go to the data tab and it tells you all the ways you can get Excel data, and then I see, oh, from text. Click. So now it wants to know where it is. So I go here and you notice that it's looking for a .csv file, but the file we created is a .ctl file. That's out of the box. That's what it does. It creates it as a CTL file representing symbolically the word control. So what we say is we change this to all files. We select the simple CTL file, click on import. So this little wizard comes up and it says, is your file delimited or is it not delimited? If it's not delimited, are all the field lengths or field columns, I should say, column widths, are they all the same space or are they not? So in our case it is delimited. And you notice here it starts giving you hints, commas or tabs separate each field. And so here it's what the actual file is looking like that it's going to import. So we say next. And it says, how have you delimited your data? So we're going to uncheck tab, we're going to check comma. And you notice this change here? Let me go back to that again. So it's, if I left it on tab, nothing gets really delimited here. But if I go to comma, then it shows this is one column, second column, second column, second column, second, so forth and so on. Text qualifier, if there was any text, it would qualify it with a double quote. Pretty straightforward Excel import basically. We say next. And then, as you may or may not be aware, Excel tries to guess as to the type of data that you're trying to import, and these are all text looking things, fields I should say, labels. So for this purpose I just leave it on general. Some of this is kind of tweaking. Some of this is you import it and then you're like, it didn't give me the right result that I wanted, and you go back and you import it again and change it. You know, dates can be kind of finicky that way. So it all depends on how it comes out. So we say finish. And I actually want to put that import over here. I say OK. So here we are. We're in Excel. And we've taken the simple control file and imported it as fields to help us lay out our import data. So let me minimize this a little bit. So you can see these are all the fields. Hopefully you guys can still see that okay. Let me change it to 95% just in case. Alright. So one way that I do it is I go into the screen itself. Let me minimize this. Go back to here. I'm back in SL. I'm going back to General Ledger, Budget Maintenance, and we did some data input a little bit earlier today. So we know that the account, just to make sure I have the right account that I picked, was 3020. So I go into here and under C account I put 3020. Then sub, we talked about using 2 on this field, 02, and then the rest were zeros. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat a little bit, hit that, highlight that, Control C, come over here, and then paste. And remember, the intelligent one said it had a mask, right? So there was a mask field. Let's go back to that under intelligent, and it said the sub account is expected in this mask. So the W's represent basically the characters or digits that go in there, but it shows you with the dashes and so forth. So 9s are numerics, W's are characters as represented inside of SL. So we go back to here. So ledger ID, so I go here and I say budget 1. So I'm gonna copy and paste that. Fiscal year 1999. Fiscal year 1999. So here, revision date, we talked about how it's not required. So let me open that up again. Fiscal year, you see required. Revision date doesn't say anything about being required. The rest of these don't say anything about being required, as we discussed. So that's fine. That means we just put whatever is necessary, and for our case we are trying to make a budget, so we're going to put in the annual budget figure, and I just will choose 20,000. Actually, let me make sure that this one, I had deleted this one before. Cancel. Okay. So 20,000, and then what this says is the budget period. So all those little periods in the budget screen, I probably should have left that open. I apologize. These guys here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 11, 12, 13. That's what's all depicted in here, right? They just call them period, period, period. So we're going to go to that. So let's say I put, I don't know, 200, 200. It's not going to be mathematically correct, but I'm just doing this for show and tell. Distribution method we know is optional, and it wants to know if it's either manually or distributed evenly or automatically. So we won't worry about that because we entered all the figures ourselves. So what have we done here? What we've done is we've created an import file that matches the screen layout and according to the actual sequence of the fields. So now we need to tell Solomon that this is the budget. So we type the word budget. I could have just copied and pasted from above, but so we're done with that. It's one level. So you could do this for so there's a question about if you want to automatically distribute the budget. So it actually depends on whether you enter an annual budget or not, which makes that be that field get enabled. So on this screen, if I were to, well, I guess pick another account. Let's pick this again. So if I enter like an amount here and I hit tab, that's when it says if you want to have it equally distributed. Now,
Louis, I think what he's asking is that whether or not in the import file, correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, like in your import file, what would you want to do if you wanted to not put in budgets per period? You can put in an annual budget, and then under the last field where you can put in whether an M or E, I think is the correct field. You could put in a distribution method of equal, E for equally. Is that right? The right one? So so there's M is equally, yeah. So you put an E there. I'm sorry, E for equally, and then that way you can import it in with just an annual budget, and the distribution method is equally, and so it should be able to distribute it for each period properly for you.
Great. Thank you, Shireen, for clarifying and assisting. Okay. So Natalia wants to test equally. Let's do this one first, and then we can actually, why don't we do 2? Let's pick another account. Copy, paste. Let's see, what other account should I pick? Actually, why don't I just pick 4020? And I'll just pick and choose here. I'll just pick and choose that. And choose. Let's choose E. So there's a question about the date field. You can actually put it in a date format. So if you were to put it as a short date, for example, something simple as this. So if I type 6/18, actually, let's see, if I do today, it should take today. And that should go, but we'll actually give it a shot. Let's see how it goes. And that's part of the transaction process, is actually you put it in one way, and then depending on the screen and how it validates, it may or may not accept the date format. For example, the AP screen may accept the date in one way, and the journal transactions may accept the date in another way. So here I got 2 line items on this budget. Both have an annual budget. Accounts 3020 and 4020, and then I have this one being distributed with E. So I'm going to save my Excel work just to make sure I don't lose it. And let's call it budget 2. So now I use this as a backup, my Excel file. This is not, it cannot import XLSX type of files. So the next step is to save it as the CSV file that it needs. CSV, comma separated value files, just like the original CTL file. So we go here, comma delimited, we say save, and it says, it warns you, you are using a format that's not supported, you're going to lose all this information, or formatting, you say yes. So now it's created the file, I close this, and I already saved it. So I have both. So this one was my original, and then this one has just what I saved. So you noticed it laid it out in the format that I needed. And let me do a quick check here, for example. Yep. So what I'm going to do is, because Solomon is using the control file, it doesn't need to have the fields sent along with this file. So what it wants is the raw data. It doesn't need the fields. So in this CSV file, I'm actually going to go ahead and delete this. I'm going to save this with these qualifiers, budget, telling it that these are texts, and I may or may not need to put text around that, quotes I mean, but let's try it out. File, save, close. So now we go back to, let's close the budget screen. Administration, System Manager. Instead of Control Macro Generator, we go to Transaction Import. So again, this one presumes that you have access and permissions to this screen. So this is the fields are very long, so I like to hit F4 to look at it this way. So let's examine this screen for a second. So what do these fields mean? So data file name is another fancy way of saying what is your input file. So I can hit F3, and then it's going to look for it, and I put it inside of B. Now nothing shows up here. Why is that? Well, out of the box, the file extension that it is looking for is DTA, data transaction file. But we called it CSV, so we're going to say all files, budget detail, and I'm going to make this a little wider. So again, this file path, if it's too long, it can cause errors, so I just keep it short. There is no clear, what's too long. Is it 180 characters? Is it, 100 characters? We don't know. It just, sometimes it gets finicky, sometimes it doesn't, and depending on the version too, it can be finicky of Solomon as well. So here's the file, and if I scoot over here, you see that's the file I just created with the extension. Data file type, you don't really need to worry about this. It's really going to just be ASCII, which if you're kind of a techie person, is a standard format for some data representation. So you don't really have to change that, nor does it actually let you to anything else, as you can see. Screen ID, so it needs to know what screen you're importing this information into. So I hit F3 and we see budget maintenance. We say OK. Notice this number, right? 012500. So all along it's been using this field here, these values I should say. And let me make sure, actually I need to put that file in there. Let me put this in here. So now it needs to know where is the control file that I showed you guys through the control macro generator. So I hit F3. I just dropped that in there about 5 seconds ago. So I'm using the S version, the simple version. There are cases where if you use a simple it won't take, and if you then change it to the intelligent one it will. That's what I mean about robustness and flexibility. You try one, if it doesn't work, try the other, without needing to tweak or rework all the stuff that you set up in Excel. So now I want an output file. Output log I should say. Output log is really another way of saying where should I put the errors that I find, where should I write them. So what I do is I just click here, hit Control C, click here, hit Control V, and then I just go here, and you can call it budget detail log, or you can call it error.log, you can call it whatever you want. But if you have multiple imports going on for different screens, it makes sense to me to name them accordingly so you can pair them up, input and log at the same time. Minimize, so what is this referring to? So minimize is saying I either want to watch the screen as it's copying and pasting and importing the data in, or I don't want to watch the screen. In past versions, watching the screen can cause an issue, believe it or not. Can't really explain why, but I've seen it where I simply uncheck this or check it, either one, and watching or not watching will let it go through. And sometimes that even depends on what you've been upgraded from, if it's from 6 to 2011 or if it's from 7 to 2011 or if it's native 2011. That's something to also tinker with in terms of results. So you see here on some of these other buttons at the bottom, select all, clear all, edit errors, and options. So options is what we're going to focus on. So what does options mean? So if this is your first import, you don't want to necessarily have it affect the system without having reviewed it, just like as a test, as a proof of concept that it worked. So the best way to do that, and what it allows you to do, and what I encourage and recommend folks to do, is to click on edit only. And that literally means like just run the process and see what happens. It doesn't actually get it into Solomon per se. The other two options means, you're pretty confident. You may have, let's say, 30 lines of records in there to import. So you're going to do a combine, edit, and update. So there's positives and negatives to that. The positive is that you get your work done, and it means combine, edit, and update. So it actually is gonna, if you have 30 lines of transactions or records, it'll import the ones that were successfully validated. So you may get 15 in there, but the other 15 bombed out. So the positive is you get some work done and get it imported. The negative is that you now have to figure out what didn't make it, fix that, and do it in a different file, or just delete the batch you imported and start over. So personally, for me, I prefer to get the whole batch right, and then I know that it's right, and then I just click on the second button. This one, I don't necessarily use update after successful edit. I've seen it where it can also cause some unpredictable results. So most of the time, even though as the name implies, update after everything is successful, meaning that if I run this batch and it validates it, and then go ahead and update Solomon accordingly. Edit only means no, just run the file, don't update Solomon. So this guy is like this plus that, but only after this completes edit. So the tried and true one is usually the middle one. For editing and testing purposes, it's the top one, edit only. I usually don't check or change this at all, data written to log file. You could just say only data and error. You can say all import data. I prefer to leave it on all import data because that way I can get a sense of where in the file visually the data is. It will flag the errors specifically, but I prefer to review the whole file. And discontinue after. So if you have a large file with a large number of records, you could have it continue processing until it gets to the 20th error. This is more of a matter of a user preference. I prefer to stop it after 1 or 2 errors, but that's, let me hit escape here. That's really what this is saying, is when do you want me to stop? So default is always 20. You can say 2, you can say 3, whatever you want it to say. But my view is, why continue running something that already has a problem? If one fails, the whole file is going to fail. So why continue doing all 20 of them? The good thing is that if you identify the problem with 1 error or 2 errors, let's say, there is usually a pattern. So you can learn from the first couple and then go through your file in Excel or Notepad, make all the changes without having to keep running it over and over and over again, and then import it that way. So if you notice there's like an error with a project or with an account, what I would do is say, maybe the account is inactive, maybe it's not the right number, maybe it's something wrong with the data for that account. So there's patterns, and you can use those to your advantage. So I say okay. So we set up the import file, we set up the type of file, we set up the screen number, the actual control intelligence file, and the output file or log for the error. And like I said, I left it, I'm going to leave it on edit only. I'm going to say okay, and we're about to begin. So it's going to run it minimized. For show and tell, let me run it not minimized. And let's see what happens. So if you saw that, it was kind of fast, and it's a small file, but it opened up the screen and it pasted the information in there for me. But I only said edit only, so it's not actually in Solomon right now. So how do I know what happened? I click on edit errors. And so this edit errors is really more like a file layout. It goes through, it tells you, hey, successful import of a budget line, successful import of a budget line, and look at this, voila. Number of errors is 0. If there was an error, it would say line 2, column 3, and you would actually know, like if you click on here, see how it says here line 2, column 28? So it's kind of nice and convenient that you can click on anywhere, and this is interactive. I'm now on line 1. I click on here, I'm now on line 2. I click on E, 72. So it'll say line 2, column 72, invalid value found. If you skip a comma, like if you notice here, there's a lot of little commas. Those are the optional ones. All the periods that we talked about, because we're testing this E method of the budget equally distributed. So if you had one too many commas in there, it'll say invalid field, or field not found, or field value not expected, or something. It'll actually describe it. So this is good. So it imported it validated the budget. It says that it imported it or validated it in edit only mode into this database. So if you have multiple databases, you want to make sure that that is correct. So that to me says we're ready to give this a shot and have it go into Solomon so we can view it in there. So let me say OK. I'm going to go back to options, and I'm going to say combine, edit, and update. Leave everything else as is, and I'm going to, for show and tell, leave it unchecked for minimized, and I am going to begin the process. Okay, let's do first things first again, edit errors. Let's make sure that nothing changed. 0 for errors detected. Good stuff. Let's close this a second. Let's go back to Solomon. So the transaction import screen is what's open here. We go back to Solomon, go back to financial, budget, maintenance. And now my import file hit two accounts, 3020 and 4020. So if we recall, we don't have to memorize it per se. We see, okay, 3020, and we see the sub account here and the ledger and fiscal year that was used. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to go into here, 3020, and then this was 02 and all that good stuff. So I'm going to choose 02 and then just keep typing zeros. F3, budget 1, 1999. And I don't remember if I typed in anything else up here, but I see that it has zeros in here. Not sure if the value is there, even though I put 200 there, so not quite clear on why those didn't necessarily get updated. It did not cause an error, so we'll revisit that. Let's check the status of the other one. Let's see, 4020. Nope. Okay, and 4020 is taken from this line here. So like I said, mathematically my numbers weren't going to necessarily be correct, but because I used the equally distributed method that was requested, then it did get equally distributed. Okay, so that's how you do the budgeting import. Now, the fact that the other one did not necessarily import, let me go back with the right distribution. Go back to that. This is why you validate it first before you necessarily go through with it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and delete this guy. Okay. And I'm going to close this. I'm going to say, okay. I'm going to go back to my input file, which is the same path I had before. manually for this, and I'm going to verify that manual is one of the options. That's the only thing I am changing here for now. Let me change this to, actually let me leave that there for now. File, save, close. So I actually just updated on the fly, and there's many ways to update the input file, but that's one way, is to just go to the file through the actual this way, File Explorer, and update it. So now this is actually still pointing to that file which I've just updated. I'm going to go back to Edit Only, and I'm going to say again, begin processing. And actually I don't want to, one more thing, I don't want to necessarily include the other import, so let me do budget 3. I'm going to take out this second row here. Control S, save. So I went ahead, took this file, deleted the second row, and added the M for the manual. And I'm going to change this to budget 3. Okay. Edit only, begin processing. I believe I saw that it didn't put it in there, but we see that there was no errors again. Alright. So let me try with combine edit and update. So let's do begin. If you guys saw that, if you caught that, it looked like it was the same result. Let me 3020. Could have been because I've been using this account for testing purposes, but it still did not like that for whatever reason. Alright, so why don't we, one last, I don't want to get caught up in too much into the actual fixing of the error, but this is a real life example of some of the things that you would have to do the import. As a matter of testing, one more thing I would like to try with you all is to just change this account to another account. And I don't know if it's the demo or if it's something else per se, but let me go here. We saw the equally distributed one work just fine. Let's do 30-30. So let's do 30-30, and then the rest is the same. So let's go to here. 30-30, the rest is the same. And let's change this to 1,000. Let me just put here. Alright, so file save. I'm in budget 3 detail. Great. So I go back to this screen. Budget 3 detail, same. Now, we talked about how sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't with the simple one. How about we go ahead and try it with the intelligent one? And let me make sure I put the intelligent one in the file too. So I go back to demo importing. Here's my -I. So here's my intelligent one. So let's go to here and let's hit F3. Select my intelligent import. this guy, I'm gonna change the name to make it match. So now we got detail log, and we talked about how sometimes not minimizing can cause issues. So let me just hit minimize, options, edit only, hit OK. Let's see what happens. So let's say begin. So it didn't show it to me because I'm running it minimized, or yeah, run minimized. Sorry about that. Click edit errors. 0 errors. And let's go to the actual importing. And let's just begin. Okay. So we'll see if it worked. If not, I do need to show you guys some other tips and tricks. Yo, is that the account that I used? I believe it is. Yep. So here we are, and it did. So it's hard to tell, right? This is where some of these imports can be a little tricky. It put in what I wanted it to put in. It tells me that the total is 1200, so it gives me an opportunity to change the annual budget to correct it and match the total accordingly. Was it the changing from simple to intelligent? Was it the change of the account that I used? Was it the M used with the intelligent at the end to fix the problem? It's not quite clear. But that's part of the process of using this tool with this technology in this way. So I'm glad you guys were actually able to see that, so you can see and get a feel for that. So let's say I don't correct this. If I try to hit save, or not save, if I try to close this, it says that the total doesn't match the annual. Do you want to correct? And I say yes. So if I do say 1200, and if I try to then, do you want to save? Yes. And it's already been saved. So that's how you validate the import, that's how you check the import, and that's how you work through the import. The concepts that we've been talking about are the same regardless of the screen. The level of complexity in terms of the actual level can depend on the level of complexity on the screen. If the screen has 3 or 4 levels, it can be a little bit more complex. So for budget maintenance, we just went through the 1 level. Couple of more things here with regards to this for SL 2011. If you notice here, so there's a question on exporting. Is there a specific export you're talking about? I asked because we've created it in Excel. So we're importing it from Excel into here, so you have it already. Quick thing, grid to Excel. What does that mean on this screen? Well, if I wanted to see what the layout was, click on that. It actually shows you a representation of this screen in Excel. The actual fields that you use. So if you wanted to keep track of what you did, you could basically keep like a history of what you're doing and which screens and what imports. So let's say you're off on vacation or whatever, you can then come back and say, where was that budget information? Oh, it's contained here. Where is the screen number? Oh, it's contained here. So you have it there. And why does that work? Why did this button light up in SL 2011 FP1? It's anywhere where you have this detail type of view. F4 for grid, form view. So anytime you have that, whatever screen you're on, this button's going to light up. So with regards to the follow-up on the question with exporting, in terms of reports out of this screen, if you just created this budget, it would have to be through whatever reports any of the budgets are done in Solomon now that it's saved. So if there was a budget distribution report, you could run that, budget version detail, so forth and so on. The screen itself, or the import process itself, if we're talking with this particular method, does not necessarily generate a report. It does produce an output of the log file, which if we go to here, the output log, you could do this. And let's see what that looks like. Let's call it budget detail log. So for Wendy, are you asking about a feature that could be added, or are you asking does it come out of the box? She's asking about how the reforecasting and exporting would assist. Let me go to here. Let's see what this output file looks like. Yep, so it literally just exported the results of the file. So this is for historical purposes. If you needed to go back and find out what was there, what was done, what errors you got, you can do that there. No different than what you see on the screen here. The other thing I wanted to show you guys on here actually is, let's say that this is going to be a repetitive process. Let's say you're going to be working on, okay, let me come back to Wendy's question in a minute, if you will. Thank you, Wendy. So let's say you're here and you are going to do this a lot. You're going to be importing the same file, or maybe update the same Excel file, maybe other files, same paths. And again, let's say you're out or somebody else is doing it for you. They don't have to memorize what you did here. Like I said, you can do it through the grid to Excel and keep a record, or you can go into here and hit template. So let's say I want to call this budget template. And I want to set it to be usable by everyone. So it says template wise, if you're familiar with templates, it's basically predefined criteria that pre-fills the screen for you, just like if you're print previewing a report, like let's say a trial balance, and you want to pre-select an account or a sub-account. You don't want to have to be selecting those fields over and over again. So this is saying, what part of this screen do you want me to save? So typically you just say all, but if you say selected, controlling info, detail, I don't really bother with these. I just hit save all, and I say save. So let's say we now close this. We go back to administration, transaction import again. And we'd say we're here. I'm going to hit F4. And then instead of typing everything, I'm going to go into here and I'm going to say template again. I hit F3 and voila, there's my budget template. So now I don't hit save because it means save the template. I hit paste. And here we are again. So it took what I just created, and this should be, it'll default to whatever I saved it. So this would be budget import 3 detail, yep. And this will also be budget 3 detail. And I believe I last used intelligent, so this should be -I, yep. So you could create one with intelligent and one with simple. You could do all kinds of stuff. It'll save whatever you just used. Now, just to be mindful, it doesn't just save all this stuff, it also saves what options you chose. So my last option was I wanted it to go into Solomon, so I hit that. But I'd rather have it be defaulting to edit only so that whoever comes after me and tries to do this, or if I try to do this, I don't run it and automatically update Solomon right away. So I'm going to change it to edit only, hit OK, and I'm going to go back to template, and I'm going to F3, hit that, and I'm going to save it because I said save all. So the fact that here I hit save all, I should have taken that change I just made. So let's prove that. Let's close the screen. Let's go back to transaction import. Let's go back to the template, F3, and I'm going to say paste. And let's see, I'm going to hit F4 here. I'm going to say options. And so it saved my edit only change that I made. Okay. And you notice, just for show and tell, that this grid to Excel is not enabled right now. It's blanked out, but if I click in the detail, then it comes back on. So within SL 2011, you have to have your cursor inside the grid view for it to actually enable. It kind of knows where your cursor is at. And then if I wanted to clear all, I can clear all these fields and so forth and so on. The easiest way is actually just select all these guys and then clear all. Should work. Haven't played with the clear all and select all too much, but usually there's not much effort to just clear those fields. Now let's see, the other thing to keep in mind is, let's say you're working on multiple companies. You could then go to here and choose a different company. This is all within SL 2011 Feature Pack 1 and also SL 2011 original version. So I'm in Coho Vineyard demo, but I'm also in Contoso demo. So just like journal transactions and AP vouchers and all that, you can be on multiple screens for multiple companies at the same time. You don't have to log in and out per se. So you could be doing parallel imports if you really wanted to, as long as you keep them straight. Okay. Let's try to run some of these reports here. I'm in the general ledger. Oh, this database doesn't have these reports set up for Coho Vineyard. Let me see if the other one does that I was just in. And this is me trying to address Wendy's question regarding reporting. So let's go to General Ledger. Let's see if it's... Yeah, so it looks like this database isn't configured that way. It's an out-of-the-box database that they provide, so I can't really budget segment, budget version. Okay, so what I'll do is I can take note of Wendy's question and then come back to you, Wendy, with that. Let me get the detail here from your question and paste it, or copy it, I should say. All right. Let's see. So there's a question about demonstrating on a two-level uh, screen in terms of the import and export. Let's see. I actually have one for the voucher screen, not voucher, journal transaction. So let's go to that. So what does that look like? Well, let's begin from the beginning. So let's begin. Let's say this is your task. It is your task to make sure that you create one for the journal screen. So we go to Control Macro Generator, and we pick the screen. Journal transactions. Same choices again. And actually, I want to put these guys in a new folder. And let me just click that for a second. So I'm going to put this one, browse demo, and 01. What's the name of the number? 010 1 1 2 3. So that matches 0 1 0 1 1 2 3. Okay. And I'm actually going to call this with the intelligent. And I'm going to say OK. And then I'm going to create a simple one. Say OK. Great. So we've created both. And let's take a look right now at what the simple one looks like. So this is what a two-level looks like. Detail literally means the detail, batch means the batch. But let's go into the intelligent one to tell us what of these fields are required. So let's go to the intelligent one again. Sorry about that. Let me hit OK. Let me just recreate this because it's faster. Alright, so here is the logic for the journal transactions. Batch is batch, and or level 0, and then detail is level 1. And then you can see here again masks, and then what's required and not required for the field. So what I do is I just kind of, okay, I keep this in the back of my mind and I say, okay, that's what I'm going to eventually have to create. Let me begin, like I said before, with the Excel file. So let me close this. So now I'm going to say File, New. I'm not sure what that's all about. Web service lookup security. I think that's a display issue. Let me close this and create another one. So the menu of Solomon is coming through the Excel workbook. Okay. Alright, so we are in Excel. Let's go ahead and import and as you recall, we talked about how the default is CTL. So here we got a simple import. It asks you again about the limited, not the limited. Uncheck this, check comma. And you see here that it's showing you both details, or both levels I should say. And I just say finish, and I say OK. And I'm going to change this for everyone's viewing to 95. Alrighty, so we got two levels here, batch and detail. And now we say OK. So let's see what the screen would look like. Let's go to this particular. Now this and the field layout, the columns that are shown, what's required, what's not required is going to depend on your particular installation. There's common defaults out of the box, but you can have, someone like Brittenford customize it for you to show additional fields or hide fields. So there's not going to be a one universal import fits all. It's going to be a basic one that you can then build off on and then modify it accordingly. Sorry about the background noise. So let's go to the journal screen. Financial and journal transactions. Okay. So what I see here is that there's batch number. If you have auto referencing turned on, it should provide you the batch number for you. Natalia is asking about the customized screens, and that was what I was alluding to, that if this, let's say this particular screen you're looking at right now, let's say that I hid auto referencing and auto reversing, it's gonna basically show them here, but only by looking at the intelligence here will you know if it's disabled or enabled. So customizing really means nothing more to it than that, or if you have additional fields, it'll show them here too, and then you'll cross-reference it with the intelligence. So we're here. And we're going to say, okay, so at least batch number 1 we would not be okay, sorry. Batch number, we don't need to provide necessarily the batch number because it's already being provided. The journal type is going to be provided, so I could just say GJ. And actually, what values is it expecting? Is it really GJ, or is it something else? So we go back to here. Batch number, key field, blah, blah, blah. This one field is required for this. Journal type, it doesn't tell me what the value type is. It just tells me that it's required. Then you see here for batch type is required, so I could type A, C, or M, or any of these values. So you can see how there's some manual processing that's required on the user's end to make sure that it's set up properly. So GJ, I'm going to choose non-recurring. So if I want to choose non-recurring, what should it be, the value for non-recurring? N. So let's go to N. Now I'm just doing the first level of the batch, so let's move this guy down. Let's move this guy up. Okay, so period to post, it's going to be that. So 1999, 112 is usually how it's recorded in the database. Batch handling, it doesn't show it as required, but if we go here, period to post is required here. C status we don't worry about. It says here that it's a required field for batch handling, but it doesn't show it in red on the screen, but that's fine. So we'll choose H for hold, because you really don't want to release or anything. Not that it would. That's the thing actually with imports. Anytime you import into Solomon, the default for importing is on hold. so that you don't just, accidentally mess up your data integrity in your database by importing something before you've had a chance to review it. So we're going to go to batch handling. We're going to set it to H, ledger ID. So we see in this particular database they have 2, so I'm actually going to choose actual. Copy. Rest of these are not necessarily shown as required on the screen. And the control total, you're going to get a chance to actually type it in. So we're going to leave that there for the batch, and we're going to label this as batch. And if we go to the intelligence, we see that it says that these two are equivalent. So I could actually type the words level 0, or I can type in the words batch. So this is alias constant, so that means the two are aliases of each other. Same for detail, level 1 or detail. So for this purpose, I'm going to go ahead and do this. So now we got details, so let's hit detail. And I again look at the screen. So if I'm in here, it doesn't necessarily show company as required but on the screen, but if I go ahead and look at the intelligent, let me close this guy. I guess I may have closed the other one by accident. I apologize. So let's go to demo J. So we get down to, you see here where it says case 1 of 1. So this is the next level because it's telling you here that this is case 0 of 1. So there's 2 levels, 0 and 1. We're done with case 0 of 1, and now we're going to do case 1 of 1. So if there were 4 levels, it would say case 2 of 4, case 3 of 4, case 4 of 4. So here, again, it doesn't say the company is required per se, but it does say that the account is required. If a value is not required, usually it will default to the value for the company or field. How do you know if it'll work or not? Again, this is where some of the tweaking comes in, the trial and error. So it says that the account is required. It doesn't give me a mask necessarily other than just straight up an account. So let's go to the account itself and let's pick I guess let's see, does it really matter? Let's just pick miscellaneous receivables, I guess. So 1191. And actually that happened to light up these other fields, as you may know, with your installations. If you're using Project Controller, this means there's a project account category associated with this account. So now I have to pick something, and this assumes that the project is active. So I am going to see what project value criteria is, project CO30. So I go back into the intelligent, and it tells me here's the mask, and it looks a lot like what's on the screen already. So character with a dash. So I'm gonna copy, paste, task. So let's pick a task. So task is that. Let me make sure that that was picked properly. So it's basically all zeros. So we go back to the intelligence and we say, what does the task look like? None of these say required, but again, it'll only pop up if you've set up Project Controller to be associated with an account category for some of these values in your chart of accounts. So in this particular case, it would be required, and that's why it's red. So it says that the task field is set up in this mask format. So basically we're going to choose what's on here. Kind of funny with the ending values there. So I'm going to say pick. And I actually, not sure if these blanks are actually going to work. So I'm just going to pick. Actually, let's see what happens if we use exactly what this says. Copy, paste. All right, sub account. So the sub, I don't remember if I picked it or if it picked it for me, but again, we look at the sub, it's red. We go back to the intelligent sub required field. Actually, the task mask is this, the sub field is this. So it's required, and it would be required typically, so we're going to go ahead and copy. We're going to go into here, paste. Not sure why it's blanking out the rest of the zeros on here. Let me select them all, copy. Oh, I think I know what it is. Home. So let me paste it into here. For some reason the copy and paste was not quite exact. Let me go back to here and also just to be sure. Alright, and I believe this one was all fine. So what have we got? We got account, project, task, sub-account. Now you notice here reference number is not necessarily required, and the rest of these are not necessarily required, but you're gonna basically want to make sure your transaction detail is accurate for your needs. So I'm gonna skip this one for 618. Let me cancel. So I'm gonna put that here for 6-18-2013. So you notice here I'm using 2013. The other one I used 13. So you know, what's it really expecting? Let's go back to intelligent. Transaction date doesn't necessarily give me a mask for it, so we'll go with this and see what it does. Employee ID, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm actually going to skip down to the debits and credits. So let's do, I don't know, for show and tell purposes. Transaction description. Let's call it test import, actually. Import. Reconciliation status and all that we don't need. Alright. So let me create another row here. And let me just pick another account. And I'm going to make this one be 10. Alright, so for here I did this, and then for here I'm doing this. So I'm actually going to copy and paste. Come on, this Excel file got a little long. Alright, so let's go back to the beginning here. And I picked, what did I pick here? 1030. I did not have a project. No task. Sub, I use the same one, 618. And this one, delete. This one. Okay. Great. So that's how I usually do it to help my data entry, is to make sure that what I see on the screen, if I were doing it simply, matches what I would do on the Excel file. So for this purpose, I'm actually going to just hit no with this outstanding change. And just to be sure, for show and tell purposes, what is the latest batch that's in here? So let's see. 000144, it's on hold. And we'll need that to see, did it in fact import our batch. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And I'm going to call it journal 1 detail, so that we save our work. Now I'm going to go ahead and save it again. And I'll call it journal 1, comma separated. And it warns you again, warns you again. It says, do you leave row 3 empty? Let me get to the rows and then see if I can refine your question a little bit for Natalia. Let me close this. Alright, so we're looking at intelligent here. So let's go back to that file. So here we are in CSV. Like I mentioned, I prefer now to see it in Notepad. So you notice it captured all the other field values and all that. So we're going to delete that. This is just like what we did last time. And because I put it in quotes, it now added its own quotes. This would cause an error, so we're going to take those quotes out. What do these commas mean? These commas are saying, in my Excel file, I left a row that was empty. And I think that's maybe what Natalia was asking about, actually. So I was doing this to help you guys visually see between the top and the bottom. But yeah, you can't have any empty rows per se in the file. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this. All the other commas are placeholders for fields that we didn't populate. Again, I don't need to see it doesn't need to get the fields because they're coming from the control file, so we delete those. Delete the double quotes. And everything else seems to line up. You can see where if I skip something, project and task, now there's space up here, and then the sub and all that. I'm curious to see what happens with this guy up here. But let's take a look. So we're gonna go ahead and save this. And actually, notice how I'm on this last row here. I prefer to be precise, and I hit backspace to make sure there's no extra spaces in the file, and then I hit save. So now my cursor is right here at the end. Alright, so let's close this. Let's go back to close the macro generator. Transaction import. F4, F3. Hit all files. Here's the CSV file. I mentioned the ASCII is ASCII. Corresponding control file name, so that's what we just dumped. So Greg is asking about importing notes into the budget import, and I believe Shireen and I had discussed that, and Shireen and I had discussed it, and I believe you cannot import notes into the budget, at least not the way it is out of the box.
And you can't print them on the FRX reports anyway.
Correct. Correct. And that was Greg's question. So I'm sorry, my head is skipping a little bit. So control file. And let me make sure I got the right one. Control file. So I chose the wrong one there. Let me hit F3 again. So we're going to choose a simple guy. I usually start with simple and then I graduate to the intelligent one if I need to. I'm going to control copy, control paste. I don't want to minimize because I want to show you guys. And I do need to change the name here to reflect the log. This matches that. The all-important options. If there's any button on this screen that you need to remember to press, is the options and edit only. I personally prefer, like I said, for all the reasons I stated, to make sure it's validated and working properly. And 2. We only got 2 detail rows in here, but if we had 30 or 50, you could see how 2 would make a difference for errors. Alright, so we got the input, we got the screen, we got the control file, and we got the output file. So let's begin processing. Okay, the screen looked good. It was kind of fast, but let's go to edit errors. Maximize. Now it says errors detected was 2. So we go here, file, search, and we look for the word error. And that it wasn't too helpful. Let's look up here. Let's start from the beginning. It says impossible value, since this is a rather small file, for a control box, for batch type, for a combo box. So what it's saying is that bat type, GJ, it didn't like GJ. I hope that makes sense to everybody. So how do I know that that's what it's referring to? How do I know it's the GJ? So it's pointing me to this, and I know that the batch number was optional. We looked at the screen and we typed GJ because that was one of the selected values, but also in the intelligent file it tells you journal type, basically, or bat type I should say. So what it's saying is that, actually I correct myself, it says bat type for here, it's a combo box. But it's saying it's an impossible value. So let's go back to here. And I put N. And it says N for non-recurring. So why don't we do this? It says it's required. It says that it's adjustment, allocation, consolidation. What happens if we use the intelligent one? Because why bother really looking at the rest of these errors when the first one will cause the rest of them to fail, basically. So one of the first things I do is I just go ahead and change this to intelligent, since that's where I got the value for the placeholder. So let's go to here. I'm going to change this from S to I. It's going to run under intelligent. I hit options, I say edit only. Everything else is the same. I hit begin processing. So let's see what happened. So it's still giving me, did I close this? I don't know if I did. Yeah. So for the bat type, impossible value, so it says that the values are J and all that. And for non-recurring, it could be that it's case sensitive, it could be that it's something else. So as reference, and then here it says impossible value for batch handling, and then here it says H and all that, and I already have H here. So I'm beginning to wonder if it's actually the case. So let me go to the actual file. Let me change these guys to N and H. And you notice that still was on all in the first row, level 1. So funny thing is it populates the screen as you saw, but it still gave that error. So let's hit save. Alright. And then I do have another reference file that I can look at if I need to. But all we did was change that, and we talked about running it minimized or not minimized, but let's see if I run it minimized. Alright, so that finished. That's funny. So you notice here it's not flagging any errors now. And it's 0. Wow, that's 2 in a row for today. So for the budget and for the journal. Was it the caps? Was it the minimized, not minimized? It's hard to tell unless you feel like going back and trying to change and see what happens. But that's what I mean. It's kind of some tweaking. So we see there was 0 errors. So it means that even though I thought it was going to have some problems with this guy, it still took it. So we're going to go ahead and close this. We're going to go to options and we're going to say combined, edit and update. We say OK. Everything else still the same. I'm running with intelligent. Sorry, it's funny the way the cursor goes to the very end here. And I'm going to run it with minimize just because it worked last time. So let's go ahead and get it into Solomon. Begin processing. And by the way, if there is a large file, you'll see it go, 0, 10, 20, 15%. If there's an error, what you'll see is it'll say processing 100%, and it'll keep going. I've seen it where it actually will say 200%, 300%. Then you know there's a problem because that's just impossible. So again, we verify that it says 0 errors, and there are. We go to the journal transactions screen. And this is acting this way because I left it open here. We go to financial. By the way, quick tip. Let's say you're on the administration menu and you said, well, I was just in the journal transaction screens. Do I have to click financial and all that? You can actually click your little drop down and it remembers where you were. So this is part of the new with Solomon 2011, so I can just go to, and it remembers it per company. So you see here, you may or may not be able to see how, because of the small print, but it says Contoso GC, and here it says Contoso LTD demo, which matches this. So I go to here, and it takes me right to the module, and right to the screen. So the number, if memory serves right, was 000144 was the last batch that we saw. So I hit F3. Voila. We got 000145. And here we are. Actually, it looks a little too big here, but again, I'm here. I can hit F4. I can see it this way. I can see it that way. But you can see that everything that I entered to be imported is now here. And it defaulted basically on the ones that I didn't choose or select. It accepted the period like I wrote it, 1999, 12. It accepted all these values. So this one actually matches exactly my journal detail from here. Okay. And then, so what you would do is, let's say you had just imported this. You would now say, yep, all the debits and credits, everything is equal. So I type in my control total. They really want you to do that. They don't want you to just automatically just import the batch. So it's, like I said, the handling is for you to then make sure it gets uploaded and released and so forth. Okay. Once again, though, here we are. I press on the transaction and this little button lights up. So if I click on that, let's say I'm doing a lot of data entry, that nice new feature with SL 2011, it puts it into Excel for you. This matches your screen layout. So if you've customized it to hide project and task, it will hide project and task. If you've created this in Excel as a template, let's say over the years, and you do all your data entry in Excel and then you copy into the journal screen, you can you don't have to keep updating. You can just do one of these that I just did, grid to Excel, and it'll put it here for you, all formatted with all this stuff, the filters, the coloring, and all that. And you see here it also captured my detailed for my description, and it defaulted to these guys here. The same thing would happen for the vouchers. It's just that it's 3 screens, so the same process, or 3 levels. So the same process we just went through. There would be a batch, document, and then detail. Same thing for those as well. Simple and intelligent, and so forth and so on. Things that people ask about is, for example, concur integration, or maybe data basics integration, or even IMIS integration. You know, how do you get those into Solomon? The concept is the same, whether it's IMIS provides, for example, or concur, any one of these fill in the blanks, provides an output file from their system, or we somehow extract it from their system if we can talk to their database. At the end of the day, we're going to need the file in this format. So this is where folks like me talk about requirements, and we say to the folks that we're integrating with what the requirements are. So at the very minimum, what values they need to pass, and what is required and what's optional. And then they'll need some validation rules themselves. You know, if this is like an expense report, how do you know if it should be if a report should require a project or not require a project or a task, and so forth. So all those rules and logic get worked out, but at the end of the day, what gets produced is this file to be imported into Solomon. Just like with anything else, you could do a direct import into the database, but that's not supported by Microsoft, and it's not best practice, and it can compromise your data integrity. So this is the best way you could keep track of all of these files and then have an audit trail of what you've been importing and what you have in the system, so that if you're going through your books or your reports and you're finding some discrepancy and you thought you imported this but what you're getting out is that, then you can at least review what you've been importing. Finally, on that note, this also serves as a way to go back to the vendor if their file caused an error. Let's say this report here had come from another vendor, like an IMIS or Data Basics or Concur. You don't want to fix it here, because now Solomon will be right, but the source system that it came from will be wrong. So you want to go back to the vendor and say, hey, this project or this value here for this ID is not correct. That doesn't exist in our system. Or this sub account or whatever the task is. I've seen that before, where the vendor created a new task in their system. We haven't created the task in our system in SL, and so they're out of sync. So we get a file that then doesn't go in, and the work has to happen outside of Solomon so that the output from the vendor will be correct. Always go back to the source. Don't correct it in the target. And then actually, with having said that in mind, if you then import this and then you say, well, I want to change it inside of Solomon now that I've imported, true, you could, But again, if you're using this as an audit trail, you're not going to have this be consistent with what you imported in the journal batch. So, if you change the debits and credits here, but you didn't change it here, it'll still be out of sync. And this would have come from a vendor, for example. All right, so let's summarize. What did we talk about today? We talked about transaction import, talked about where it's located. In previous versions of Solomon, we talked about it was under utility. Now it's in the administration menu under utilities submenu. I mentioned how you need to have permissions for this feature in both of these screens. So if someone gives you permission to do transaction import, you probably are going to need permissions for control macro generator unless they've gone ahead and created all the macros you're going to need for you and place them somewhere where you can get them. So usually these two go hand in hand. And permissions usually are assigned at a group level. But again, this goes back to the security model. So whoever has access should have access to both of those screens. So we talked about where that's located. Then we talked about what the control macro generator does. I mentioned how macro really is the Visual Basic language used in Office applications. Not sure why that happened, but in Office applications. So if you're in Excel, you're familiar with macros if you've kind of written some yourself, but it's basically a way of automating the logic of the screen. So we talked about how this will create that logic for you per screen number. And you can see it's basically a lot of screens, almost just about every screen in Solomon. We talked about intelligent versus simple, how intelligent gives you the case logic, so to speak, like in case 0 of 1, case 1 of 1, the different levels. We talked about the file name and if you wanted to see the macro. We then went ahead and examined those logics, the logic of those that we just mentioned. And I mentioned how in terms of my practice, what I do with my best practices, I create both and I label them accordingly. I start with simple to lay out the groundwork for the Excel file here. I talked about how I import these in as comma delimited files into Excel using the data from text value. And then I mentioned how to know what fields are required and what the logic is. I talked about how I look at intelligent and I decipher it that way. We also talked about masks and what they mean and what values are expected, what format, so forth and so on. Release now, hold, release later. And then we talked about in transaction import, I prefer to view it in F4. We talked about the actual data file name being your import file, the ASCII being something you don't really have to worry about, the screen ID being the screen, your target screen that you wanted, that you created the control file for. And then we also talked about your actual control file being the intelligent and simple. And finally, your log file being your error file, error log file. We talked about options and recommendations for that. Begin with edit. Maybe reduce the number of these errors so that you don't have to let it run for multiple errors. You can just stop at 2 or 3, kind of see what's going on with the output. Then we talked about once you're satisfied with the results and that it's been validated, changing it to combine, edit, and update. And then we talked about templates. And I hit F3 and I close that a little too quickly, so I go to this little hieroglyphic and I say template. So we talked about that. I hit F3. So again, for your staff, if you're not there, if it's a new hiree, you're training them, They don't have to memorize everything. They can just go to the template. You've already selected here to save all with the template, and you're going to paste it. And now here we are on the screens. And then finally, we talked about minimize or not minimize. Even though it's kind of cool to watch the screen get populated, like we saw, it can sometimes cause issues. So you can experiment with running it minimized or not minimized and see how the results go. And then you review your errors on the edit errors, and then you can actually modify it that way. Oh, and on the budget, we talked about whether it's manually distributed or equally distributed, however way you want to do it, which can then be corrected on the screen. Alright, so that's pretty much covers everything that I was hoping to cover for today. Appreciate all the questions. I believe we've addressed them for you, but if there's anything else further after this, you can certainly contact us and follow up. And thank you so much for attending the training. Much appreciated. Hope you learned and it was valuable to you. So, and looking forward to the next training with you all. So I'm not seeing any further questions, but again, if you have further questions, you can always follow up with us. Well, thank you very much, and have a great day.